Thank you, Cathy. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and holding this symposium, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I'm delighted and honoured to be asked to welcome people today, visitors, speakers in the symposium, the artists who've prepared their works for installation in the Great Court, in the exhibition curated by Fiona Foley, with able support from Fiona Nicoll. The project's taken many, many months of hard work, planning and organisation. It's been a really massive effort. But now we're all here, participating in an exchange of ideas and solidarity in relation to the appalling legacy of colonialism and a post-colonising regime that continues, seeking to maintain the dispossession of the indigenous owners and deny their sovereignty. So for the next 3 weeks, the Great Court will show the visible presence and vitality of Aboriginal cultural survival in the works prepared by the 8 artists: Michael Cook, Christian Thompson, Natalie Harkin, Ree, Ryan Presley, Archie Moore, Carla Dickens and Megan Cope. The Great Court's been a place in the past where challenges to power and privilege have often been manifested. I remember back in 1972, one of my comrades, Dan O'Neill, lamenting the fact that they'd started planting trees in the Great Court. And he said this was actually a plot to cut down on the amount of space that was available, to amass people in the Great Court, to march them off into the city. And those were days of very substantial opposition to the Bjelke-Petersen government that continually brought in regular attacks on democratic and human rights. The movement was particularly strong in supporting land rights and Aboriginal sovereignty in the 1980s, during things like the Commonwealth Games in '82 and the bicentenary celebrations in 1988. But hundreds of staff and students from the University of Queensland got in the course of that an education in silenced history, and they marched and they got arrested in those demonstrations, and they were all built up and organised and often assembled in the Great Court. Another campaign that was very important some years ago now was to have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags fly on the flagpoles of the Forgan Smith building on the Great Court. Initially that was just to be for NAIDOC Week, but more recently it's been on a permanent basis. But this installation that we have now is something new and original, again, unlike anything that's been done before, and it stands as a reminder to white people that they're on Indigenous stolen land. It's been wonderful to have Fiona Foley here at UQ as an adjunct professor attached jointly to the Schools of Political Science and International Studies and the School of English Media Studies and Art History for the past 3 years, and also wonderful that she's agreed to continue this association for the next 3 years. Fiona continues to achieve increasing recognition for the power and beauty of her art, as well as international recognition of the importance of her work. To give 2 brief examples, being invited in 2013 to give the keynote address to the Origins Festival of First Nations, and being among the 8 Australian Indigenous artists whose works were exhibited in 2000 in Leningrad in the Winter Palace of the last Tsar of Russia, of which one Russian reviewer wrote enthusiastically, "This is an exhibition of contemporary art, cased in the mentality, technology and philosophy of radical art of the most recent times. No one, other than the Aborigines of Australia, has succeeded in exhibiting such art at the Hermitage." I could give many, many more examples of Fiona's recognition, but I really haven't time to talk about her aesthetically beautiful and politically powerful creative practice, her public sculptures in Queensland and elsewhere, all the other exhibitions of her photography, painting, etching, moving images and installations that she's had in Australia and overseas. But I'll just mention that there's a lovely book, Forbidden, Fiona Foley, which was prepared for an exhibition that was held at the Queensland Art Museum, and it's got many plates that show many of the different aspects of Fiona's work, and it's a really nice thing to have. If you want to drop into the UQ Art Museum, which is just when you go out of the door, look straight ahead, it's just across the grass. I believe they've got a discount price that's quite reasonable, but it's a terrific book to get. That was produced for an exhibition of Fiona's work several years ago. Fiona's work is high art and at the same time art with a never absent political message about the search or the demand for sovereignty, Aboriginal self-determination and justice. Franka Tamasari, who was a lecturer here in 2010 when the exhibition was on, wrote in one of the essays in this book dispersed, "Fiona's art and character are like a slow-moving river, underneath whose deceiving placid, conceptual surface flows an incessant and determined sensual current that has been wearing away the pillars of science and indifference on Australian race relations. Fiona has been relentless in dispelling the reticence of history by asserting the stories, experience and presence of her Budgela kin and ancestors and the Indigenous community at large." And that's something that can also be said about the other attendees here, their commitment and their engagement with Aboriginal cultural survival through art in various kinds of ways. So, Fiona, for all your efforts in creating these events at UQ with an extraordinary lineup of Aboriginal artists, I'd like to say thank you, and I think that's on behalf probably of everyone here, and I'm sure we're all excited. And looking forward very much to the interchanges and experiences of the next 2 days. Thank you.
I'm Fiona Nicoll, and I want to publicly acknowledge the power of Fiona Foley as a curator, thinker, artist and strategist. I firmly believe that nobody, except for Fiona Foley, would have taken a project of this magnitude on, and nobody, except for Fiona Foley, would have had the fighting spirit and steely commitment to see it through to the end. I've been working beside Fiona on this project as an academic staff member for 3 years, and I'd like to share some of my experience. Before embarking on this project, I used to invite her to speak to my students each year about how her public art practice transforms cultural space in Australia and particularly in Queensland by uncovering hidden histories. During those lectures, I used to feel a mixture of exhilaration and nervousness as students listened and responded to the images and ideas behind her artistic interventions. There was no political correctness when Fiona was in front of the classroom. She spoke to students as adults and expected them to respond honestly, no matter what they were thinking. And I knew that by the end of the class, their understanding of what Indigenous issues were and who Indigenous people are would be changed forever. Still, I felt nervous. Early on, after Fiona joined us as an adjunct professor, a common response we'd get while walking through campus together from senior staff members was delivered with a knowing smile. "Here comes trouble." And sure enough, there's been many troubles visited on Fiona as she's worked to deliver as an unpaid adjunct staff member this challenging gift of public art to the University of Queensland. And I've continued to feel exhilarated and nervous as she has forged ahead to empower Aboriginal artists to speak in a public space of art where up till now they've been spoken of rather than with. The privilege of working with Fiona has heightened my awareness of how racial concepts and values move in institutions to subtly shape business as usual. Sarah Ahmed, in her book On Being Included, Racism and Diversity in Institutional Life, makes some observations that are pertinent to Fiona's work within the university. Quote, "Organisations manage their relation to external others by managing their image. Diversity work becomes about generating the right image and correcting the wrong one. Diversity becomes about changing perceptions of whiteness rather than changing the whiteness of organisations." Within this disorienting house of mirrors, Ahmed argues that authority never appears in the naked form of white sovereign will. Instead, this will is most often felt as an invisible wall. She writes, "It's only the practical labour of coming up against the institution that makes this will become apparent. To those who do not come up against it, the wall does not appear. The institution is lived and experienced as being open and diverse. But when you don't quite inhabit the norms or you aim to transform them, you notice them as you come up against them. The wall is what we come up against. The sedimentation of history into a barrier that is solid and tangible in the present. A barrier to change that remains invisible to those who can flow into the spaces created by institutions." End of quote. Fiona Foley and the Courting Blakness artists have not flowed into pre-existing spaces in this institution. They have fought to make space for this project, moving under, around and over walls that continually reappear and reassert authority over and within this space. In this fight for space, unexpected allies have emerged within the institution at almost every level. Those whose response to Fiona's gift has been to gift their own money and time and skills to help make this project happen. So I thank all the supporters of Courting Blakness, but most of all I thank Fiona and the 8 artists who we'll be hearing from today and tomorrow.